Welcome. It's good that we're here. This conversation is being sponsored by the Marcus Borg Foundation. And the Marcus Borg Foundation is actually built on the foundation that Marcus Borg left us. Biblical, theological understanding about the Christian tradition and how we can re-enter it with perhaps a renewed vitality. So the Marcus Borg Foundation is interested in continuing a conversation about a meaningful and realistic understanding of Christianity in this 21st century. And it's not so much a reflection on the established doctrines and dogmas, but exciting our imaginations and our engagement for what is the word and voice of Christianity in this very religiously pluralistic age and very complex time. Okay? So we're sponsoring this. I am delighted that at Trinity Church here there is room at the inn for us. So we rent this space so that we can gather here on the second Saturday of the month. So I am incredibly grateful to Trinity that this is available to us. And as a word to Trinity, I want you to know that this is a place where conversations like the ones that we're going to have today and have had are possible and welcome. So that tells you a lot about Trinity Episcopal Church here in Bend. This is a place where these conversations are welcome. I do want to say a disclaimer that the opinions expressed here are not necessarily...
I want to say the opinions I express are not necessarily mine. I reserve the right to disagree with anything I say at any moment. Yeah.
And we do.
We do.
We do. Sometimes we'll start out somewhere and then we'll shift a little bit as we start moving along. So anyway, it's great to have you here. I'm a little curious, for how many is this your first time? This is like our third conversation.
Quite a few. Good. Wonderful.
Wow, terrific.
Thank you.
Welcome. Yeah. It's great to have you here. And spread the word around and about because all are welcome to participate in this conversation. Okay. The topic for today is mysticism, right? Reinhold Niebuhr had this critique of mysticism, which is that mysticism starts in the mist, has I in the middle, and ends in schism.
Yeah, right. That's Niebuhr.
That's Niebuhr, but that was his critique. It's like, this is what people think mysticism is about. It's like, it's kind of amorphous, it's pretty self-serving, and it's all about my experience of mysticism, which actually I think is important. And his concern in communities is that it would create a schism. It's like, well, we're more mystical than you, that kind of thing. So Niebuhr's critique was, I think, was sort of said with a wink and a nod. One reason that we wanted to choose this topic today is that in the Christian calendar, we're in the season of Epiphany. Okay? Throughout the liturgical year, there are different seasons in the year that have different characteristics. If you will, they describe different landscapes of our lives and of the biblical narrative. But Epiphany, the definition of it is to reveal or the sudden manifestation or perception of the essential nature or meaning of something. Okay, epi is surface, phanos is manifestation. So it's sort of what is here surfaces so that we can apprehend it. Usually an epiphany happens, it's sort of an intuitive grasp of reality, and it comes through something like an event, usually something simple and striking. Epiphany is defined as an illuminating discovery or realization or disclosure. So this just seemed like an appropriate season to explore mysticism. And if you have trouble hearing me, let me know. Thank you, Chris. Okay. Let me just throw out a definition or two of mysticism. If you Google this, one will say it is knowledge inaccessible to the intellect. So how can we know, right? It's considered a self-delusion, dreamy, confusing thought. It's often put in the category of religious ecstasy. Mysticism is considered a hidden truth. There are others who suggest that mysticism is basically the search for deeper awareness and consciousness of God. And I'm just going to use the word God without overly defining that right now. Okay? And with that in mind, it's considered a really integral part of religion. Okay? That it is part of the search and longing for more meaning and understanding about what is. Okay? That's mysticism. Rather than it being something special and separate. Okay? I want to remind you of a definition of religion that I offered in our first session. There's a Latin root for this word, religare and religare, and I'm sure I have not pronounced them correctly. But one definition suggests that religion, religio, is that which ties things together. So it's the human effort. Religions are human constructions in response to how we experience this. So religion, if you take the definition of to tie together, it's an effort to weave together a narrative or an understanding that explains the world and what it means to be human in the midst of limit and death and mortality. That's kind of the function of religion. It's meaning seeking. It's a way for us to construct meaning. Okay? A more ancient root, but the same thing, religare, is, and this I love, is that religion means, the root means to pay particular attention. So religion is about paying attention. And in that, I think that mysticism and religion definitely go hand in hand.
Yes, they do. I
would suggest it's about paying attention. And you might remember Mary Oliver in one of her poems said, I don't know how to pray. I do know how to pay attention. And may that be so for us. And for those of you who now know how to pray, share it, let us know. But I love what she said. I don't know that I know how to pray, but I do know how to pay attention. So I will just add one more thing, that I suggest that mysticism draws our attention to what is important and meaningful and of value in analogical ways. Before I continue, I'm going to read our Listening Hearts guidelines. This is from Listening Hearts Ministries. I know many people here in this room use this in a number of settings. This is kind of our ethos in a way that guides us in our conversations. And I want to underscore today that this isn't just how we talk with one another, but it's actually titled Listening. This is also how we listen. Okay? So I'm going to read these 10 guidelines. I do this every time we gather. This is just part of our ethos, part of our hospitality. All right? And I will say, to start, I break these rules all the time. I think they're difficult, but I think that they're worth us keeping in mind and trying to practice. And as I said, I think this is about hospitality. Okay, so as we are together, these are the discerning listening guidelines that we try to follow. Take time to settle in God's presence. Listen to others with your entire self. Senses, feelings, intuition, imagination, and rational faculties. Do not interrupt. Pause between speakers to absorb what has been said. Do not formulate what you want to say while someone else is speaking. Speak for yourself only, expressing your own thoughts and feelings, referring to your own experiences. Avoid being hypothetical. Steer away from broad generalizations. Do not challenge what others say. We will probably be the first ones to break that rule today.
Completely disagree with that.
Listen to the group as a whole, to those who have not spoken aloud as well as to those who have. Generally, leave space for anyone who may want to speak a first time before speaking a second time yourself. And number 10, hold your desires and opinions, even your convictions, lightly. Okay, great. Okay. To begin our conversation about mysticism, I am going to read one of my favorite quotes from Augustine. I'm going to read this twice. But the reason that I'm reading this today is sort of an introduction to our conversation about mysticism is that in this passage, Augustine names all of the senses. Okay? And I suggest that the senses are actually our portals or our apprehensions to this mystery. So that our senses are actually can be our guides, that they're not hindrances. And what all of this points to, and we'll talk about this, sort of how mysticism has been understood and where kind of we want to move the conversation, is that I think where both Bill and I are on this, is that rather than mysticism being for the special elite few, the really sensitive ones, that we want to not so much demystify mysticism as democratize it. Get us to think in terms of it being whatever the mystical is. It's accessible, I would dare say, for all of us. For all of us, not just for some of us. And I will even go on to say that I think that sometimes the way we describe either our experiences of God or what we think God is supposed to be can predetermine our experience. So what I love about this quote with Augustine is, and Augustine, my goodness, this is part of the tradition. This is a long time ago. But he started to get a sense of the presence of God through his senses that shifted his own experience. And I dare say that mysticism is all about embodied experience. We can argue that. Okay, I'm going to read it twice. He's addressing God. How late I came to love you. O beauty, so ancient and so fresh. How late I came to love you. You were within me, yet I had gone outside to seek you. Unlovely myself, I rushed toward all those lovely things you had made. And always, you were with me. I was not with you. All these beauties kept me far from you. Although they would not have existed at all unless they had their being in you. You called. You cried. You shattered my deafness. You sparkled. You blazed. You drove away my blindness. You shed your fragrance, and I drew in my breath, and I pant for you. I tasted, and now I hunger and thirst. You touched me, and now I burn with longing for your peace. How late I came to love you, O beauty, so ancient and so fresh. How late I came to love you. You were within me, yet I had gone outside to seek you. Unlovely myself, I rushed toward all those lovely things you had made, and always you were with me. I was not with you. All these beauties kept me far from you, although they would not have existed at all unless they had their being in you. You called, you cried, you shattered my deafness. You sparkled, you blazed, you drove away my blindness. You shed your fragrance, and I drew in my breath, and I pant for you. I tasted, and now I hunger and thirst. You touched me, and now I burn with longing for your peace.
We're going to divide this up very much like we have in the past too. I'll offer some thoughts about mysticism, and it'll take 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes. Today we have our little timers. I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog too. So when this thing is done, these two things are done, they will total 25 minutes. I'll be done. And then we'll have about 15 minutes or so to reflect and share. And then a 15-minute break, and then Marianne will resume from there.
My husband always had a timer. Any of you who've ever seen Marcus Borg given up. Yeah. So this is our variation on the theme.
Right, on the timer. Anyway, as you heard from Marianne and her brief introduction to mysticism, mysticism, and I'm now referring to it in its more of its kind of high medieval, we're talking about 700 to 1,000 years ago form, it tends to focus on a completely out-of-body experience. Those of you who've seen that Subway ad, they have these out-of-sandwich experience, and the two people are floating above themselves. This is a parody of that, but that's essentially what mysticism was about. The limitations of our humanity, in the medieval sense of it, are transcended for a moment. And complete union with God, the universe, everything, to quote Douglas Adams, is achieved. It is fundamentally indescribable as that very first definition of, I'm getting a little feedback here, so I'm not sure what to do about that.
You're already getting feedback.
I'm already getting feedback. It's not all good either. Anyway, it's fundamentally indescribable, except in terms of metaphor, a la that first definition that Marianne offers us about it's an experience that's really not accessible to the human mind. It's so completely transcending of human self-awareness that comes through our senses that to say, I am having a mystical experience means emphatically you are not having a mystical experience. Because the I, the ego, is so completely lost in union with God that we no longer have any sense of ourselves. So in this sense, mystical experience is what takes us not just outside of ordinary human experience, but outside of all human experience to that place where the material world is left behind altogether. The classic development of this is that 12th or 13th century anonymous English book entitled The Cloud of Unknowing. Perhaps some of you, I read it 30 years ago or so and have forgotten everything except the title and that sense. that sense, that you leave behind your humanity. As Marianne said, your senses are the portals. Your senses are the means by which you open and prepare yourself for this moment. But this moment takes you completely beyond the senses altogether. Now, I want to offer three considerations about that high medieval notion that's still of mysticism that is still with us. First, again, as Marianne noted, this sort of thing happens in every spiritual and religious tradition I know of. There is a strain not just of thought, but I believe of experience within human life, which not only yearns for, but at times seems to reach some sort of direct union with God, the universe, everything. The limitations of what it means to be human are, for a moment, transcended. And that last bastion of our conscious humanity, which is our ego, is for a moment dropped away. Every religious tradition that I know of speaks of this kind of experience. The loss of the sense of the individual replaced for a moment by a sense of the all, by perfect union. That just happens. And the reason why I believe every spiritual and religious tradition talks about it is because it really does happen. It really is part of what it means to be human. That's the first consideration, is this stuff is real, even though it is unquantifiable. The second consideration is that this kind of direct union, even for a moment, means there were at times when the institution, capital I institution, be it Christianity, Islam, Judaism, was not the mediator of God to the people. It was bypassed. The institution, the sacred writings, the doctrines, the practices could be bypassed altogether upon occasion, and this made folks suspicious of mystics, regardless of which tradition we're talking about. Sufis, for example, no less than Teresa of Avila, were thought, and perhaps still are thought, to be weird. Genuinely weird people, and perhaps even a little dangerous. And that's why, for example, although I don't know about religious traditions other than Christianity, frankly, this is why, at least in Christianity, nearly every mystic I have read over the past 20 or 30 years has gone to great pains to emphasize their complete orthodoxy. I believe in the Nicene Creed. I believe in the Council of Chalcedon. I believe in the Athanasian Creed. I am completely orthodox. So you don't need to worry about me, even though I'm doing and teaching this weird stuff. You don't need to worry about me. It's part of why, as well, I believe, the exponents of mystical theology spoke at length about how rare it is and how difficult it is to prepare the soul to be so open to the presence of God that mystical insight and experience could infect them. This, don't try this at home, folks, was basically the message of most mystics. Because, in fact, at least in the Western Catholic tradition, they were considered to be a little bit dangerous. And in the Calvinist tradition in particular, they were so completely frowned upon that mysticism was sometimes considered to be a sign of possession by the devil. And it is only actually in Protestantism that the so-called, the general tradition, the ecstatic tradition represented by churches like the Assemblies of God, the Pentecostal tradition, is really the only one that embraced the notion of some kind of ecstatic vision, speaking in tongues and so forth. The rest of Protestantism, Anglicanism certainly, Lutheranism, Presbyterianism, the Baptists were all remained, and frankly, to some extent to this day, remain rather suspicious of the whole notion of mysticism as it is understood in that traditional sense. Third, in the West at least, mysticism has been profoundly influenced by Hellenistic dualism. That split between the soul and the body, with the body being lesser than the soul. In fact, the body being worse than the soul. Mystical experience is often described as a way of leaving the body behind so that the soul can commune unhindered by the weight of the material. Judaism escaped this dilemma for the most part, or this dualism for the most part, because Jewish theology has long not only resisted but rejected the notion that there can be a soulless body or a bodiless soul. Hellenistic dualism, Platonism, it comes to us from Plato, is very much a part of the experience of Greek culture, but not Jewish. Jews argued then, and I believe argue now, that you can't have a bodiless soul or a soulless body. You just can't do it. And if you want to look at how much trouble at times this caused for a Jew influenced by a Hellenistic education, look at St. Paul. In the end, his Jewishness won out. But St. Paul was forced to resort to the notion of a spiritual body. He could not imagine a soul without a body. So when he's asked, rhetorically, in his correspondence with the Corinthians, well, what does the resurrection body look like? And he says, that's really a stupid question. That's not how it's translated in English, but he says it's a moros question, from which we get the term moron. It's a moronic question, he says, because the body has to die before it can be raised, but when it's raised with a spiritual body, which is not, of course, further defined by Paul or, frankly, anybody else. But that's the point. Paul had to resolve this problem, and that's how he solved it, with the notion of a pneumatic body. Incorruptible. Now, for all these three reasons, I don't like Platonic dualism. I struggle to be as Jewish as I possibly can be in this regard. I have never considered myself to be a mystic. This is just true confessions here. I don't believe in the Hellenistic, or more specifically, the Platonic split between soul and body. And I do not believe that my body is in any way inferior to my soul. I do not believe that. It is not a prison in which my true self, that is to say my soul, is trapped until the moment when it is freed by the death of my body. My soul is not just some gizmo stuck inside me waiting to escape. I just do not believe that. My body, and indeed the entire universe as far as I'm concerned, is the living, breathing, vital, and dynamic organism through which the transcendent, and I will emphasize, I'm still very happy to use the term God. I think that's a useful term, as long as we don't consider it a proper name, a name of someone. Hi, my name is God. As long as we don't consider it a proper name, but rather a way of identifying that transcendent dimension of reality. I'm happy with the term God. But that's the way it is. It is my body, all my senses, the body of this universe, which is the way by which all of us are nourished, all of us grow, all of us become wiser. We have to have our bodies. Our bodies are good. And if you want a proof text of that, just read the first chapter of Genesis. Just read that. And you will see that God saw the material as good. And then in the end, he says, wait a minute, this is not just good. It's very good. Now, we do terrible things. There's no question about that. I take a backseat to no one in believing in the doctrine of original sin. To quote Niebuhr again, it's the only doctrine for which there is irrefutable proof in the human experience. But we are good. Our bodies are good. Material is good. So I'm not a Hellenist. Moreover, I have to say, I've never had what I would consider an experience of direct union with God. Again, I must emphasize that it happens. It just hasn't happened to me. Finally, While I do not believe for 1 minute that institutional religion is the one and only mediator of God to the people, I don't believe that. I think that's been refuted enough times that we no longer need to argue that. I do agree with the nervousness the institution has when it comes to people who have mystical experiences. To claim direct union with God, direct insight from God, is, to my mind, a very dangerous claim to make. And I feel it important to emphasize that. History has a rich repository of charlatans and deluded people who have done a great deal of damage by claiming that link with God and therefore a presumptive right to tell other people how to live and what to think and how to behave. And that's why, by the way, I remain firmly within the Anglican tradition. I was born in it. I don't know that I'm probably too lazy to have ever left it, even if I didn't like it, because I always take the path of least resistance, even when it's not the path of least resistance. But this, to me, is a valuable part of the Anglican tradition. Our tradition declares that no one, no preacher, no bishop, no synod, no convention, no canon, no rule, nothing, can require the faithful to believe or do anything that has not generally been believed and done by Christians at all times. Which is why our understanding of doctrine ends in the 4th century, basically with the Nicene Creed and the Council of Chalcedon. We just say, you don't have to believe or do anything that goes beyond that. You just don't. So we are freed, theoretically, we are freed from the inspiration of other people. We don't have to, we can say to someone who says, I have been talking with God and God has told me this, we are free to say, well, God hasn't told me that, so, I'm not going there. So for those 3 reasons, in other words, I have some sympathy with those 3 observations I made. Now, let me go on and say, and yet, as I begin to develop as a progressive Christian, I discovered that there is, in fact, an immense value in the mystical tradition, provided that it's adapted to the time in which it finds itself. There is nothing inherent in mysticism that forces it into a Platonic dualism in which we say the body is less or worse than the soul. There's nothing in mysticism that requires us to say that. On the contrary, again, we are good, we are made good, and Genesis 1 demonstrates that. Again, I don't want to take a backseat to anybody in terms of the reality of evil, the reality of our sinfulness and so forth. But beneath our inability to bring about the world of our dreams, the world our best selves want, beneath our inability to bring that about is goodness right to the core. And that is where, by the way, that sense of goodness right to the core is where mysticism in the modern context begins to make sense to me. For I believe that the only real way to understand and become completely suffused with the love through which and by which and in which this whole universe was created, and which comprises each of our beings, love at the heart of it, is through some sort of transcendent experience of unity that breaks down our sense of separateness. It's not, however, an experience, therefore, in which the soul transcends the body and gets to a place where, freed from this material weight, it can contemplate God. It is rather an experience in which whatever it means to be human, body and soul, becomes, for a moment, so completely enwrapped in us. We become so gripped by the essential wonder and goodness of God and the universe, everything, however you want to talk about it, that for a moment we leave behind everything that denies that goodness and that love and that unity and rest in it. And this means that I am convinced that mystical experience in its modern form means that we are not taken away from the material at all, but rather we become so completely immersed in the material that for a moment we glimpse its core and see that in the material, in the created, is nothing but goodness. All of the material, all of the created. We are, in fact, all one. And in fact, as we know, science over the past several decades has actually proved that. Remember the song that Judy Collins who wrote it? We are stardust. We are golden. We are million-year-old carbon. All of us. Every single one of us. Now, I want to illustrate these notions with a book. Now, I thought about which book. Do I Teresa, Hildegard, Julian, The Cloud of Unknowing? And I thought, why read something that's 800 years old? Even though it is great literature. So I remembered this book. Sue Monk Kidd, who's read this book? Several of you, not a lot. This book, The Secret Life of Bees by Sue Monk Kidd, illustrates more clearly than any book I have read in the last 20 years or so what I mean by mysticism in this era. This is a wonderful illustration of it, as far as I'm concerned. The protagonist in this book is a young girl, 14-year-old girl named Lily Owens. And Lily Owens is a child ruled by self-hatred and for good reason, because she comes from a family that is a festival of dysfunction. An absolute festival of dysfunction. And yet throughout the book, Lily at times experiences the permeability of the universe. I guess that's what I want to say. Glimpsing now and then that the core of her being and the core of the universe, the core of God, are the same. And then she comes under the truly benevolent influence of a woman named August Boatwright. And it is a woman, despite the lack of a feminine A at the end of her name, who guides her to this deeper and deeper insight into the mystery of her own self. And therefore, in finding ultimately her deepest self, she finds the true God. And finding the true God, she finds herself transformed by the love that comes from and through that God. And Lily is redeemed. And so I just want to offer you a few quotes from it. And I'll try to...
We're good.
We're good, okay. Early in the book...
As you said, we're very good.
We're very good, yes. We're very good. Thank you. Actually, Genesis says that. God says that in it. But anyway, early in the book, Lily is out, and she's sneaked out of the house. And there she is in the night, and she looks up through the web of trees, and she says, "Night fell over me, and for a moment, I lost my boundaries." The key moment of mystical insight. Feeling like the sky was my own skin, and the moon was my heart beating up there in the dark. That's union. That's union. Now realize, she's realizing she's doing this. So it's not the classical sense of mysticism where she loses all sense of self, but rather her sense of self becomes wrapped up in unity. Now, later on in the book, where she's having a horrible moment of self-loathing, she comes to this moment. You could say, she says, that I'd never had a true religious moment. The kind where you know yourself spoken to by a voice that seems other than yourself, spoken to you so genuinely that you see the words shining on trees and clouds. But I had just such a moment right then. Standing in my ordinary room, I heard a voice say, "Lily Owens, your jar is open." And the context for that is she had put bees in a jar. And she opened the jar in order to let the bees go. And she said, "Lily," she heard this voice saying, "Lily, your jar is open. You can go. You too can be free." She heard that voice. It came to her as gift. And then she says, I realized for the first time in my life, there is nothing but mystery in the world. How it hides behind the fabric of our poor, browbeat days, shining brightly, and we don't even know it. So Lily, now this is all before she meets August Boatwright. Lily is, and she runs away from home, by the way, to do this.
What a great metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah, your jar is open, Lily.
And running away from home.
And running away from home, yes, exactly. Now, Lily then goes, she escapes because T. Ray is a terrible dad. As I say, this family is a festival of dysfunction. So she goes and she sees on a jar of honey a picture that her mother had. It's a picture of a black Madonna. And she sees this picture and said, this is where we need to go. We're going to escape and find this place. Because somehow there's a connection between my dead mother, who, by the way, Lily accidentally shoots and kills, in a moment of extreme horror. So I'll let you read the book and you can get the context.
So is that a spoiler alert?
A spoiler alert, yes. But it happens early enough that it doesn't spoil a lot. Yeah. Anyway, she goes to August Boatwright's house. In August Boatwright's house is this carving of what they say. They say it's Mary. We'll see in a moment that it didn't start out being Mary, but it is now. And this is her experience of communion with this carved little statue. Lily says, everything about that smile of the carving said, Lily Owens, I know you down to the core. She's communing with this wooden statue. I felt she knew what a lying, murdering, hating person I really was. I wanted to cry. But in the next instant, I wanted to laugh. Because the statue also made me feel like Lily the smiled upon. There was goodness and beauty in me too. Notice as Lily moves inches further into unity with God and with the universe, she is able to look at herself whole, neither denying her capacity for evil, which is barely in her. She suffers from poor self-esteem. Let's put it that way. But also at the same time, without denying that, she is able to affirm the goodness and beauty. Later on in this book, and it's somewhat later on, she's asking August Boatwright why they chose the Black Madonna label for the honey that they sold. And August Boatwright replies, I wish you could have seen the Daughters of Mary. That's an organization of black women. August is a black woman, and she leads this organization of black women called the Daughters of Mary. I wish you could have seen the Daughters of Mary the first time they laid eyes on this label. You know why? Because when they looked at her, it occurred to them for the first time in their lives that what's divine can come in dark skin. These are black women in the South. And she says, you see, everybody needs a God who looks like them, Lily. And I was reminded of this quote when the first time I went to Haiti in the cathedral, which is now destroyed. It was full of murals depicting various biblical scenes. And in every one of those biblical scenes, all of the people in them were black. Haiti is 99% black. It's a former slave colony of France. And they're all black. And I remembered that quote when I saw that. Jesus looked like those people. And if you say, oh, that's not fair, remember that in every single European painting, the most brilliant artwork in the world, history of the world, as far as us Northern European types are concerned, Jesus looks like us. And you know what? He looked more like a Haitian than he looked like us. He was a Semite. He had black hair, brown eyes, dark skin. August continues in this same vein. You know, this Mary, this painting, she's just a figurehead off an old ship. But the people needed comfort and rescue. So when they looked at it, they saw Mary. And now listen to this. There's no fraud involved. And so the spirit of Mary took it over. The spirit of Mary came into this thing. Her spirit isn't really everywhere, Lily. It's just everywhere. It's inside rocks and trees and even people. But sometimes it will get concentrated in certain places and just beam out at you in a special way. The spirit of Mary inhabits this for the sake, inhabits this figurehead off an old ship. It inhabits it for the sake of the daughters of Mary. August Boatwright continues. What I mean is that the bees, and now she's talking about the secret life of bees. It's the theme of the book. What I mean is that the bees were really singing the words from Luke. They really were. But still, if you have the right kind of ears, you can listen to the hive and hear the Christmas story somewhere inside yourself. You can hear silent things on the other side of the world that nobody else can. So the bees are singing about the birth of Jesus, as far as August is. And August says, if you understand, you can hear it. You can hear the song. It's accessible to everybody. And again, not transcending what it means to be human, not transcending sight and sound and so forth, but rather becoming so immersed in our own lives, in the life of the universe, that we can hear the bees singing about the birth of Jesus. And finally, there's this. My breath came faster, says Lily. Something coiled about my chest and squeezed tighter and tighter until suddenly, like somebody had snapped off the panic switch, I felt myself go limp. This, by the way, is characteristic of mystical insight as it is expressed in 13th and 14th century literature. My mind became unnaturally calm, as if part of me had been lifted right up out of my body and was sitting on a tree limb, watching the spectacle from a safe distance. The other part of me danced with the bees. I wasn't moving a lick, but in my mind, I was spinning through the air with them. I had joined a bee conga line. Now, I want you to notice, Lily is not transcending the limits of human experience. She is rather experiencing the fullness of human experience so completely that she knows what's happening. She is aware of complete union. So, and this is one where I had difficulty not crying the first time I read it, but I think I can do it. August shows her a number of things from her mother, because it does turn out that the reason her mother has this picture of the Black Madonna is her mother had fled to August Boatwright's 10 years before, when Lily was just 4 years old, and had lived there for a time, had come back, and then got killed. So August shows Lily a number of things from her mother, the last of which is a picture of Lily's mom and Lily, but she was, I'm not going to make it.
That's all right.
Yeah. And Lily says, I didn't care about anything on this earth except the way her face was tipped toward mine. She's looking at the picture, right? Of her and her mom. 4-year-old Lily, her mom. I didn't care about anything on this earth except the way her face was tipped toward mine. Our noses just touching. How wide and gorgeous her smile was. She rubbed her nose against mine and poured her light on my face. I looked down at that picture and then I closed my eyes. I figured May, who was one of August's sisters, who is now dead, I figured May must have made it to heaven and explained to my mother about the sign I wanted. The one that would let me know I was loved. That's mystical insight, as far as I'm concerned. To be so completely in tune with the unity of everything that you can actually, perhaps for the first time in your life, realize that you are loved. Truly and completely. And not just for what you've done, but for what you are. All of it. The good and the bad. The parts you like about yourself and are willing to talk about, and the parts you hate about yourself and try to keep a secret even from you. You are loved. So finally, Our Lady, says August, is not some magical being out there somewhere like a fairy godmother. She's not a statue in a parlor. She's something inside of you, Lily. You don't have to put your hand on Mary's heart to get strength and consolation and rescue and all the other things you need to get through life. You can place your hand right here on your own heart, your own heart. And whatever it is that keeps widening your heart, Mary, that's not only the power inside you, but it's the love. And when you get right down to it, Lily, that's the only purpose grand enough for human life, not just to love, but to persist in love, no matter what. That, to me, is the heart and soul of mystical insight. To be able to persist in the love, because we are so deeply immersed in the goodness of creation, in the goodness of God, that we have been completely transformed by it. And I believe, and I'm talking about myself here, who has not had this experience. There's not one of us here so immersed in our own stuff that we cannot have at least a glimpse of that same unity, that same essence, that same love. No one here cannot go through that. All of us, every one of us, experiences a profound sense of separateness. I'm me, you're you, we're not the same, right? And that makes us lonely. That brings grief. Maybe not always. And maybe we don't even know how grief-stricken we are. But from time to time and very deeply. That sense of separateness. And most of our anger, most of our confusion, most of our self-righteous judgment of others, most of our judgment and self-condemnation, it all comes from that ability to deny that we are one. From that ability to not see how completely and intimately tied together we are in the oneness and unity of all of creation. We are each other's keeper, and we have a way to deny that. And therefore, because we can deny we are each other's keeper, we can therefore prefer personal safety to expansive compassion. That all comes from that sense of being separate. My argument is that if we are to understand mystical experience in the 21st century, we must understand that it is mystical experience that breaks that sense of separateness down. It wipes it out. It obliterates it, even if only for a moment. And therefore, in that moment, we can glimpse the deepest truth of all. That we are all one. That we are created by the one, capital O one, whose name, St. John tells us, is love. As we get there, as we experience that, not by transcending what it means to be human, but becoming so completely immersed in what it means to be human, we are at the core and heart of mystical insight. Thanks. So what time is it? Thank you.
I'm just going to sit in the silence for a minute or two and just be present to what we've heard and how it's affecting us. Okay? So just be in silence for a minute or two. I'm going to give us another minute of, I think we have a minute, don't we? Isn't there one that says a minute? Anyway.
1 minute.
There we go. Another, not yet, not yet. Another minute of silence. And we have a little less than 15 minutes to do some sharing. So in this next minute, just see what comes up for you that you might want to share, just speaking into this gathering. And my instinct is to say that rather than crosstalk or, even if you have a question, we might just let that question hang in suspension rather than our trying to respond to that, okay? So in this next, a little less than 15 minutes, just offer whatever you would like into this space in light of what Bill has said and in light of what we've been talking about. And when this little 1 minute timer is up, I'll ring the bell, and then I will just, we'll welcome whatever you'd like to speak into this space. That make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Jed has a microphone, which I'm very appreciative of that. So
lots of reflections.
So it reminds me of the Dalai Lama, and he's speaking with Desmond Tutu, and he's always talking about himself as part of the 7 billion other souls that are on the earth, and how to have compassion. We have to all have compassion for all of us.
Trying to find the accessibility, paying attention. One of those moments when you get a glimpse. I was just taking this opportunity to think about coming up in a week. Mary Louise and I are going on a jazz cruise. Don't think jazz as much as think music to sort of share the experience. And it seems like it for me, it always has to be a live music presentation. When you can see musicians communicating with one another, and every now and then you say, boy, I'm glad I was here to hear that.
Two images came to my mind this morning listening to you two. the first reading the statement of beauty of Augustine, I kept hearing the Hopi song, Walking the Beauty Path. And it resonated very strongly. The second image that came to my mind while listening to Bill was the Japanese poet. I can't recall the name. Am I a butterfly dreaming I am a man? Or am I a man dreaming I am a butterfly? I've been in both of those places.
Nice. Thank you.
I agree very strongly with the embodied mysticism and ecstatic experience. I'm not an expert on the ancient mystics, but it feels to me like some of them were also very non-dualistic. Eckhart, Hildegard, others, that they had that sense of unitive joy through encounters with nature and in and through body. So I sense that there was that very strong like body denial and mortification period. So it kind of seems like a mixed bag, and I'm still going deeper into some of those and sensing the tension of how it was distorted, as well as how what you're speaking of in Sue Monk's kids' work, which is marvelous, brings us to a more holistic realization of what that experience is about. So I don't want to throw all of them out, but kind of pick.
No.
Maybe it's wrong to pick and choose, but it feels like some of them speak of that, and as well as the Sufis and all the others from the other traditions. So how do we find sort of the wisdom to discern where we're being led to that more holistic, loving, unitive thing that will hopefully save us or help us save creation and each other?
The book that Sue Monk Kidd wrote before Secret Life of Bees is called Dance of the Dissident Daughter, where she describes her journey from patriarchal Christianity into a much more feminist, goddess-based spirituality. Highly recommend. And also Traveling with Pomegranates, where she talks about being in Greece with her daughter. And it's partly written by her daughter Anne, as well as Sue. And it's just adds a whole layer of richness to what Bill's describing. So.
I have been nourished by Celtic Christian spirituality, which I think is the resurgence of interest in it has given many people a path, a way to find the thin place of what in my own Christian tradition seems to me that the incarnation is the very, very heart of the mystical goodness and unity of the material and the spiritual, which never ceases to unfold.
I think for me, as a Black woman, I felt that I was being invited into acknowledging my blackness in this very white community. And that felt good.
Thank you, because that's certainly a deep theme of this whole book.
Once I was high in the mountains, lying on my back in a very open area, and I could see stars, and suddenly I felt as though I could fall into the sky. That's for what it's worth. One other time, I was really down on myself, and I thought, what value do I have? Why am I here? Why haven't I contributed something? I felt as though I owed humanity something. And it occurred to me, I'm okay because I'm here. And suddenly that was the core. I'm here. This comes from a person who was not given any religious training when I was growing up. So other than my grandmother telling me when I asked her, what is God? She said, God is your conscience. And because I grew up with a lot of little Catholic kids who came up with good things, if you step on the cracks in the sidewalk, you'll break the devil's dishes. And I didn't believe in the devil, but there were occasions when I deliberately stepped on those cracks. I lost my train of thought. So, thank you.
Now, Jed, right here, after all.
The piece that really calls to me is what flows out of those moments of illuminative experience. I think some of the mystics like Eckhart and Teresa would say that's actually the illumination moment, and the union actually comes when compassion flows out and becomes embodied as, Eckhart would say that's when the Son of God is born, when Jesus is born over and over again. That in that three-step purgation, illumination, union, that even though we have these amazing moments where distinction and indistinction become the same thing, that sort of Neoplatonic, non-dualistic, paradoxical encounter with reality. But then what flows out is that rebirth into the world of compassion in a way that says this separateness is not real. This union I've glimpsed is what's really real. And then my actions become the actual moment, the actual embodiment of that unitive experience. So I'm just noticing, wanting to not leave it there, but to notice this ongoing flow back and the breakthrough back into the world, and where we become Christ in the world in a newness of way that we perceive, and yet it's like I have to go back, back. It never ends. It's a spiral of. So I really appreciate just that sense that even though there is this tension with the Platonic in these mystics, when you kind of get down into the core of their experience, then a lot of that stuff just sheds away. And I really appreciated also that insight that that's where the tension in trying to read that literature comes, is there are those moments that really are describing it in a non-dualistic way, and there's moments.
From Thomas Merton. Life is this simple. We are living in a world that is absolutely transparent. and God is shining through it all the time. This is not just a fable or a nice story. It is true. If we abandon ourselves to God and forget ourselves, we see it sometimes, and we see it maybe frequently. God shows himself everywhere, in everything, in people, and in things, and in nature, and in events. It becomes very obvious that God is everywhere and in everything, and we cannot be without God. It's impossible. The only thing is, we don't see it. Well, I'm going to risk a little bit. I want to share part of my experience of the morning Marcus died. And some of you have heard this. I shared some of this at a women's retreat, 2 years ago now, I think. So some of you, this may be familiar to some of you. But in Bill and I talking about today, I decided that I would like to share what happened the morning that Marcus died, which was January 21st, 2015. So I'm coming up on the 4th year anniversary. And the reason that I want to share this is that even though the events of that morning, of course, are very, very particular and personal to me, and you'll get a better idea of what I'm referring to in a moment, but my contention is that what I experienced that day says something about the nature, I dare say, the nature of reality. And any kind of experiences that we might have, I would caution any of us, myself included, to not try to make universals out of all of this, okay? So I'm not suggesting that this is some kind of a template for you. But what I will insist is that what happened to me, I am sure on some level, comparable, has happened to every person in this room. That's my contention. Okay? So I want to just share with you a little bit about the morning that Mark died. And actually, maybe I should begin by the night before. And I didn't know that this would be his last night, but it was in the middle of the night. And I said to him, Marcus, I said, if you can appear to me, if you can be in touch, please be in touch, And Marcus gave me this look. Sort of, I imagined how Jesus might have looked at his disciples when they asked him some things, when Jesus, how long have I been with you? And you asked me a question like, whose will I be in the, in the hereafter or whatever. So what I said to Marcus, if you can be in touch, please be in touch. He gave me this look like, what are you thinking? And actually, I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed because, as some of you who know me, I thought, if Marcus can be in touch with anybody after his, certainly be me, right? And but the look I got was it quieted me. I didn't pursue that line of curiosity with it. So it was about 7:05 on that Wednesday morning when he died. And by the way, it was a beautiful, beautiful day. It was just, crisp, cold, but spotless sky and light, and it was lovely. And the way I reflected on it later, actually sunrise was at about 7:25 that day. So one of my own reflections was that he rose before the sun that day. So it was about 7:05 that he died, and probably about 7:15, maybe 7:20 at the latest. Harper One, his publisher, had sent him about 24 tulips about 10 days prior. And they were, a myriad of colors. And so we had these tulips in a vase on a desk, and you know how tulips are, they sort of grow as, well, they were gorgeous. And actually it looked more, this was in the midst of winter, but it looked like spring. So here are these tulips that had been growing. And so at probably about 7:15, 7:20, I noticed that the petals on the tulips started to drop, one by one, and then in just these silent clusters. And within a few minutes, maybe 10, but who knows. But basically, the tulips had shed all of their petals. And so on this table, here are all of these tulip petals. Okay? And my experience of these tulips, it was like, they were like tears. And it was almost as though, there was something sort of, I'll project this now. What I observed was the tulips, but it seems just so empathic. And that after this good 10 days, almost 2 weeks of this full bouquet, that they shed their tears with me that morning. So the funeral home people came. And we were fairly new to the area, so there are a lot of funeral homes around. We live out in Powell Butte, so there are a lot of funeral homes between here and Bend. So, I kind of picked one, in between, and so we gave them a call, and the head of the funeral home, it was actually a young woman, she came. And, of course, there was somebody else from the office, a burly guy, to come and, with the gurney and to take care of the body and stuff like that. But the owner of the funeral home came. And she was probably in her mid-30s, I would say. Her name is Kelly. And she came and said, when I heard that it was Marcus Borg, I knew I had to come. And, we didn't know anybody here. And I didn't think anybody knew us, So here comes this woman who happens to be the head of the funeral home that I happened to pick. Her name is Kelly, and by the way, she was pregnant. So she comes in and she's pregnant, and she said, when I heard it was Marcus, I just, I couldn't believe it, and I just had to come because I took classes with him from Oregon State. And he was my favorite teacher. And I said, he was my favorite teacher too, So here, in this foreign landscape to me, on many levels, not just the high desert. I lived in Portland for over 2 decades. Here, the head of the funeral home happens to be somebody that knew who Marcus was and had seen him in the classroom. So it's like, oh, you know who he is. you know a little bit about the loss. But I thought it was amazing that somebody came who actually knew him. Okay. So, by the way, I said to her, I said, when you have your baby, I said, if it's a boy, you got to name him Marcus. Or Henry, the name of our dog, who is Marcus's four-legged soulmate. Well, it was a girl, and I think she named her Charlotte. So I asked Kelly, I said, Kelly, did Marcus ever talk to you about the path? Yes, I have to do this. So she came, and what they did is they put this patchwork quilt over the body. Okay? And this was holiday time, so it was sort of in, and there were little Santa Clauses and Christmas trees and stuff. Not quite my style, but, it was seasonal and all this. And so we covered him with this patchwork quilt. And I said, Kelly, did Marcus ever talk to you in class about the patchwork quilt? And she said, I don't think so. And I thought, probably not. But I said, well, Marcus people would come up to Marcus after a talk or whatever and say, "Oh, Mark, things seem so overwhelming and change is so slow, and I really don't even know how to go about it, and what difference can we make?" And so Marcus, borrowing actually from Sally McFaig, an image from Sally McFaig, wonderful theologian, Marcus said, "Well, consider the patchwork quilt. Determine what is yours to do, and then do that. And if all of us together kind of do what we feel like, no, this I can do. And if we bring all of this together, we will have a much broader effect than we could ever imagine right now. So consider the patchwork quilt." So here's Marcus. And what do we cover him in? But a patchwork quilt. So I took handfuls of the tulip petals, and I covered his body with them. We tucked him in with a patchwork quilt. And I ended up taking our two dogs out for a walk. And in the sky, I noticed there was a little rainbow patch in the sky. I'm sure somebody here who knows about temperatures and lights and all kinds can explain it. It wasn't this kind of a rainbow. It was a patch. And I actually took a picture of it with my iPhone because I thought that maybe I was just sort of making this up. But it showed up. It's amazing. As it turned out, this is a little bit weird, but for the next 3 days, every time I took the dogs out on Desert Sage Road, there was a patch that followed us. I know. Okay. Now, I share that with you, and let me just say the obvious. This is the morning that my beloved husband died. Marcus died that morning. It was probably one of the most devastating. I've experienced a lot of death in my life, but nothing prepared me actually for Marcus's death. So this was the morning that Mark died. And the tulip petals, Kelly coming, she knew who he was, the patchwork quilt. Those experiences, it was like God in present tense. Whatever my concerns may have been or are about what happens after death, on that morning in particular, it became really clear to me, that is not the question. I don't know. But what happened on that morning, I felt located. I was new here. I felt located. The experience with the tulips, as I said, it just felt almost empathic. The patchwork quilt, for me, had such meaning. And I knew that was an image that Marcus used to try to console us and say, carry on, do what you can. And then even that patch in the sky. And at the time, I was actually befriending a Buddhist here in Bend, and he had talked about death and the rainbow body, which I'd never heard of before. But so it was just an imaginative nod to me about a rainbow body, I don't know anything about that. But all of that was so immediate. It was intimate. It was so personal. And as Bill said earlier, these mystical experiences, we don't contrive them. We don't make them up. And they happen beyond our own ego. And as you were quoting Sue Monk Kidd about some things will just beam out at you, right? In a special way. It's like that morning, these things beamed out at me in a special way. And it's what you were saying with Lily, it's just the sign I needed. It's just the sign I needed. What are those signs? It's not that it points to anything beyond. the reason I'm sharing this story is that on that morning, these things happened. And it didn't change Mark's death. I mean, my grief has been profound. It hasn't taken away any of that. I think, but it's a reference point for me. I go back to that morning as though it happened yesterday. And there's something about it that sort of, it's like that separation thing. Even though I was a stranger here in a strange land, I felt located. I felt somehow known. I felt, I did not feel separate, even though I just lost my beloved. Okay? So I wanted to share that with you because I would put that in the category of mystical. It's not Platonic idealism. It's not a separation of body-mind. It's not, I was not beside myself. You know, Augustine talked about, you were with me all the time, but I was beside myself. You know, when we say I'm beside myself, I'm not really. I was totally present to myself and thank goodness to this. And that experience has just shifted. It shifted a lot for me, and I'm still working through it in terms of God. What is God? What is this presence? What is this? You know, classical physics will say that once something is in motion, then it's predetermined. Quantum mechanics says that a particle observed behaves differently than a particle that is not observed, which suggests that consciousness has an effect on how things unfold. It's almost as though there was not just my consciousness, but a consciousness that was aware of something that morning and addressed me through these things in a profound way and in a very personal way. And anyway, it's something that I'm still thinking. If someone had come to me and said, Marcus is such a beloved, wonderful guy and such a great theologian, even though some people thought maybe he was on a slippery slope, but I'm sure that he's now, being cradled in the arms of Jesus. I mean, I love Jesus. The tulips, the patchwork quilt, Kelly, the patch in the sky spoke to me more deeply and intimately than any propositional consolation. Okay? And when you've experienced something, experience should always precede propositions. But so often we do it the other way around. So I wanted to share that, and I felt that I could share that in this group. Not so much because it's about me, although it's very much about me, but because I dare say that what I experienced that morning, that kind of thing, that kind of, it's to borrow from Buber, it's a kind of I-thou moment with what is. It didn't prevent Mark's death. It didn't even take away the sting of death. But it was definitely an I-thou moment. On the morning Mark died, which made it even more significant. On that morning, this also. So, and my senses, my own sense, even before this happened, but that this kind of thing happens all the time to all of us. To all of us. So even though I can say to you it was special in particular for me and very personal, very intimate for that day, I also say, yes, it's about me. But for me, it said something to me about the nature of reality, capital R. And it includes death. But that in the midst of that, something beamed out at me in its own particular, tender, decisive way. And I suggest that stuff is the stuff in which we live and breathe and move and have our being. And that's accessible and will manifest to us. I think it manifests all the time. So what I would like to suggest, I'll let you say something in a second, but what I would like to suggest is that we take a minute of silence. And I'd love to hear from any number of you about either your response. Again, I'm not going to do any cross-talking or to try to explain anything, but I'd love to hear if, I'd love to have my suspicion confirmed that, yep, this kind of stuff happens a lot and everywhere, and that there's not, I don't think there's a person here who doesn't know what I'm talking about, who hasn't had something like this. Who hasn't had something like this. Okay. Do you want to say anything?
Only one thing, and that's just to relate it back to one thing from the book. When August told Lily, she said, it's really just a figurehead off an old ship. They're just tulips. It's just a patchwork quilt. But those people need comfort and rescue, and therefore the spirit of Mary came into that old masthead. And I want to say the spirit of God came into those tulips, came into that patchwork quilt, and became for you a moment of genuine unity and illumination. So,
and even with death, birth.
Just an old masthead. It's just an old masthead. It's just tulips. No, actually, it isn't. It's not. It's something more.
It is and it isn't.
It is and it isn't. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Okay.
Other thoughts?
Well, let's take a minute.
Oh, take a minute.
Yeah, I'm going to take let's have our little, since we have these little darling little things. So I'm going to give us a minute to just sit with all of this, and then I'll welcome your sharing. Okay? I'll ring the bell after the minute.
Marianne, thank you for that very, very sweet story.
Oh.
I really appreciate that. I just wanted to make a comment about what you said earlier about the portals that through our senses. I work a lot with dreams, my own and other people's dreams. And one of the things that it does, I see it as another portal that it cultivates an awareness of synchronicity. And like the indigenous grandmothers talk about the web of lights and the synchronicities, it makes the universe come alive. It's like spirit is infused in everything that we see and do. And so your story about the patchwork quilt and what are the chances of calling somebody, that knew Marcus? And even this morning, I've been struggling for weeks with a condition. And synchronistically, I run into my old friend Jerry that I haven't seen forever, and he gave me some information that really was what I needed. So I think it's an awareness of it's there all the time if we just open our hearts and open our minds to spirit. And thank you.
Oh, thank you. Even though we're not going to crosstalk, Gordon Kaufman has this wonderful phrase. He calls it serendipitous creativity. That's kind of one of the ways he describes God. And I would say on the morning Mark died, serendipitous creativity.
until hearing you speak, I think of it as coincidences. You could really relate things. So.
Pretty cool coincidence.
I like to reflect on the gift of having a mystical experience. And for me, they've been saturated with surprise. The two most powerful experiences I've had have been through grief, the loss, this poignant loss of those that I have loved. And I'm not going to go into the specifics, because what I want to address is what is born for me, what has been born for me out of a mystical experience is compassion, comfort, kindness. It's been affirming rather than disturbing or distressing. And the practical aspect of that reinforces my desire to live in a world that is broken and beautiful. I don't want to live in a world of buts. I want to live in a world that is not broken but beautiful, but broken and beautiful. And there's a material consequence of having had a mystical experience that in a very concrete way has helped me do that. Surprised by God.
Thank you for that.
Got one in the back there.
I had a similar experience when my mom died, related to a beautiful sunset and her gorgeous smile. And every time I see a sunset, it's like a rebirth. Do you have a rebirth when you see rainbows?
I gave everybody enough chance, so. I hope you get the humor in this. I was going through some real dark times and doing what I thought was praying. Middle of the night, hotel somewhere, and I'm praying, now, God, why all this? You know, I've been trying to be a good Boy Scout and behave myself, walk the straight and narrow, and I have all this dumped on me. And so I said, I'm tired of this. I'm giving it up. It's all up to you now. I quit. And I heard a voice. The voice said, well, it's about time. Now, my eyes are closed, and I'm a little bit terrified at this point. And so I opened one eye. Well, I should preface this by saying the room was dark, and when this came about, the room lit up. Now, my eyes are closed, and I'm thinking, this is kind of weird. My eyes are closed, and I'm seeing light. And that added to the fear and terror. So then the light dimmed down, And I thought, there's got to be someone here. What's going on? So I reached over beside the bed and I turned the light on and looked around the room. I mean, it was that real to me at that point. Now, call it what you like. But from that point, my appetite came back. I started saying, hey, there's a chance here. Now, it's kind of a, I laugh at it now, but at the moment, it was a very real experience. So I hope that'll open up something more in the way of sharing around the audience here.
Thank you.
We're about it.
Okay. Let me just do a small piggyback. It's really building on stuff that Bill had said too. We think of mystical stuff as being transcending. Okay, but I think that they're actually transformational, and Bill has used this example too.
Right.
And what you've just described is something happened in you; it transformed something. Something changed.
Right.
And so what you said about my appetite came. Okay, I think that these mystical experiences have a transformational impact.
Yeah. And we got that too from your experience.
Absolutely.
And from the back of the room, I'm sorry, I don't know.
About compassion.
Yeah, who said the unitive thing is actually manifested in a transformational. In compassion, in how you begin to act and see. And yes, if I see a rainbow, it's like, okay? So. Okay.
Well, this kind of bounces off Ken's remarks. Thursday, I put my purse on the top of my car and I drove off. And this is the second time I've done that. I did it about 53 years ago, and I did it now. And I spent the day canceling credit cards and trying to get a new Medicare card and all the things I had to do. And I ended up at the DMV at 4:45. And I waited in line, and then they closed at 5. So I went home, and I was putting on my sweats and my slippers, and I was speaking to myself, God, didn't you say? And what I forgot to tell you is 53 years ago, somebody brought it back to me. So I was saying, well, God, where is that somebody? I've been waiting all day. And I got my sweats on, went downstairs, and the doorbell rang. Wow. And a man stood there in his baseball cap and regular jacket and all that, and he said, I found your wallet. Not the whole purse, but the wallet. And it had been run over several times, but my driver's license and my social security card was still there. Wow. And I think that was kind of God just showing that God can laugh. Whatever we call God, I think,
Yeah.
Great. I think I'm going to, you can pass, but Ram, maybe to close this time, would you mind sharing that story about practice? Or about levitation, or when somebody came and said, I've done this, about walking, was it walking on water? Oh, you know this story. It's about him, so you should remember it. Do you mind telling that story? Because I think that the punchline is great. Okay? So.
I held back just to make sure you said yes.
You know what I'm referring to?
Yes, at this point I do.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
It's a story about the Buddha who was sitting giving a particular teaching, and a yogi came up to him and said, I've spent 25 years. It's sort of like somebody coming into a Western town and saying, who is the fastest shot in the town?
Perfect.
So he was going to measure himself up maybe to the Buddha. And he said, well, I spent 25 years practicing walking on water. Can you do such a thing? You are such a great teacher, etc. And the Buddha reflected a second, and it says, well, why would I spend 25 years seeking to walk on water when I can pay the boatman 10 cents to take me over onto the other shore. Yeah. And so the idea is that where do we place our efforts in awakening into reality or tricks? There we go.
Yeah.
Something like that, right?
Yes, something like that. Yes.
That's a great one.
And I remember, I think the first time, Ram, you told me that story, it's like, so this guy's walked on water, and that the Buddha says something like, okay, so you've spent 25 years doing that.
Good for you.
What are you going to do now?
Yeah.
That was, where did that come from? Did anybody see me do this? No.
Are you going to say a word about next time, too? Good. Okay.
Our next gathering will be on the 9th of February. It's the second Saturday, 9 until 11:30. And because of parking and stuff, we get actually underway a little closer to 9:15, but parking seemed to go better today. Bill and I we talked about this and decided that next time, what we'd like to explore, and we kind of see this as an extension in a way of our conversation today about mysticism, but what we'd like to explore next time is the sacred. Okay? And I think that when we see things as sacred, we're much less apt to abuse them. I'll include the planet on this as well as human beings. But so, we thought, well, mysticism and that, well, let's broaden this a little bit to what is our understanding, our notion of the sacred? How do we see? How do we see all this? And where does the sacred fit in? Okay, do you want to comment?
Yeah, just one other thing. We use the term sacred a lot, and I think we mean very different things about it. I think I'm a student of U.S. history in particular, and I'm keenly aware, deeply aware, that the institution of slavery was considered sacred by certain people. And in the name of the sacred, they justified one of the most horrible systems of human relationship that the world has contrived. And so when we talk about the sacred, we are not talking about something that is automatically used for good. The sacred can be used to manipulate and destroy. Our concept of sacred can be used to manipulate and destroy, and it can be used to illuminate and unite and create. And so it seems to me that if we are to understand our task in this world, we need to understand the ways in which we use the concept of sacredness and holiness, if you will, in order to help ourselves see which path we are actually walking and which light it is that is illuminating us, so that we can actually walk the path of unity, the kind of thing we've talked about today in mysticism, of unity and compassion and love, rather than a path of destruction, a path of oppression, a path in which we use our power not for the sake of those who don't have it, but entirely for our own sake. So I think a conversation about the sacred, at least at this point in my mind, becomes really important. Because we need to know what we're talking about. And we need to know how we use the term. And we need to know what we're understanding as sacred and what isn't. So I find this, as I talked with Marianne and reflected on it on my own, I found it to be an increasingly important moment to pause and say, what do we mean by this? Because its meaning has multitudinous meanings and applications. And to keep us in that unitive way, that way of compassion and love, we need to be much more clear about what we are calling sacred than we have generally required of ourselves.
So to close for today, I'm going to borrow a few phrases from Sue Monk Kidd. I realized it for the first time in my life. There is nothing but mystery in the world. How it hides behind the fabric of our poor, browbeat days, shining brightly, and we don't even know it. I was wondering what my body knew that I didn't. Really, spirit is everywhere, just everywhere, inside rocks and trees, and even people. But sometimes it will get concentrated in certain places and just beam out at you in a special way. If you have the right kind of ears, you can listen to a hive and hear the Christmas story somewhere inside yourself. You can hear silent things on the other side of the everyday world. The sign I wanted, the one that would let me know I was loved. There's something inside of you. You don't have to put your hand on Mary's heart, or Jesus' heart, or God's heart to get strength and consolation and rescue and all the other things we need to get through life. You can place it right here on your own heart. Your own heart. And whatever it is that keeps widening your heart, that's spirit too. Not only the power inside you, but the love. And when you get down to it, that's the only purpose grand enough for a human life. Not just to love, but to persist in love. From Thomas Merton. In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people. That they were mine and I theirs. That we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness, of spurious self-isolation in a special world. The sense of liberation from an illusory difference was such a relief and such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud. I have the immense joy of being a member of a race in which God became incarnate, as if the sorrows and stupidities of the human condition could overwhelm me. Now that I realize what we all are. And if only everybody could realize this. But it cannot be explained. There's no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun. Then it was as if I suddenly saw the secret beauty of their hearts, the depths of their hearts, where neither sin nor desire nor self-knowledge can reach, the core of their reality, the person that each one is in God's eyes. If only they could all see themselves as they really are. If only we could see each other that way all the time. There would be no more war, no more hatred, no more cruelty, no more greed. And finally, our two signature quotes from Mary Oliver. When it's over, I want to say, all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. And from Stephen Hawking, try to make sense of what you have seen and wonder about what makes the universe exist. It matters you don't give up. Unleash your imagination. Shape the future. Thank you for being with us today. See you next time.